Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us in this exciting session. We're going to talk about VMware Cloud and AWS service updates and announcements. So I'm Michael Schwartzman. I'm a senior cloud solution architect here in VMware. And today with me, going to join distinguished guests from the Datrium acquisition, Scott and Matt. So basically the agenda for today is to have a 10-minute session about our latest updates, providing some background about VMware Cloud and AWS, about our new latest i3n hosts, our new minimum cluster size of 2 hosts, and our vCloud Directory Services announcements. And the rest of the time we will spend with Scott and Matt about the Datrium data center disaster recovery as a service, in a cost-optimized way, which is a very exciting announcement. We're going to elaborate a lot in this session. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. We will follow up and moderate those questions during the session. Okay, so without further ado, VMware Cloud on AWS. So this is not an introductory slide. We're going to just skip through it briefly, but just to have context for people that are not using it on a day-to-day basis. We're talking about VMware Cloud on AWS, which is a fully managed service by VMware running on AWS global infrastructure on top of bare metal hosts. On top of those bare metal hosts, we're running the entire software-defined data center stack of VMware, which includes the hypervisor of vSphere, the software-defined storage of vSAN, software-defined networking, and security of NSX. And it is all being managed in the same look and feel with the same operational consistency as you have on your on-premises environment. And basically, we're enabling you to connect the two sites together and have a seamless look and feel and the ability to migrate workloads as if you would be performing a vMotion between your on-premises environment to your cloud environment. On top of that, we're enabling with the solution connectivity to AWS native services, such as S3 for storage, EC2 for compute, etc. And we're providing this through a low latency, high bandwidth link, which because it's a unique cooperation between VMware and AWS, we're not charging for egress charges between AWS to the VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So traffic coming here from the native services to the VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC will not be charged. We're covering a very large amount of use cases. We're going to expand a lot today about disaster recovery. Prior to the Datrium acquisitions, we had and we still have an offering through SRM. But today we're going to elaborate how we can perform a cost-optimized disaster recovery use case. On top of that, we're covering use cases such as data center extension for bursting into the cloud and having additional capacity, for test and dev environment, or for peak for workloads in a temporarily time frame. On top of that, cloud migrations, lifting and shifting existing environments. If you have an expiring colocation contract or a management decision to evacuate a data center, we can support those use cases, and the whole area of application modernization, the words of Kubernetes and integrations with cloud native services. I see that we have a question. Where does the AWS server is located? Regav is asking. So basically, we're leveraging the full footprints of AWS. So the availability comes where the AWS regions rely. So 99% of the regions are covered by VMware Cloud on AWS. So wherever you have this availability of AWS, you have availability of VMware Cloud on AWS. Does that answer the question? Okay, so let's continue. So about the service updates, the i3n metal hosts. So up until today, we were using the i3 hosts, which was a great host for CPU and compute workloads. But we had some challenges in storage-bound environments. For example, disaster recovery use cases where there was a lot of storage required, but not necessarily that much compute on the steady state. With this new host, we're able to provide a very significant increase in all parameters. We can provide up to 4 times the raw capacity over NVMe SSDs. We can provide 30% more compute and 50% more RAM. On top of that, we're able to enable features such as hyper-threading, which were not available on the i3 hosts. And all in all, this is a very exciting and cost-optimized way to have storage-bound environments enabled on VMware Cloud on AWS. Another thing which we're announcing is the 2-host cluster. Up until today, we were using basically the minimum requirement for a small cluster was 3 hosts. And we have announced that we're able to provide support for a production environment with only 2 hosts. And this production environment is great for starting small and lowering the barrier to entry in small environments. And we're able to scale this environment up afterwards from 2 hosts to 3 hosts and scale it out as you need. 2 caveats on that announcement. Yet i3EN, the new hosts are not supported with the 2-host cluster. And at the moment, scaling down from 3 hosts to 2 hosts is not supported yet either. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about this kind of a solution. Another exciting feature or product that we're integrating with now is the vCloud Director Service, which enables customers to provide as a managed service provider, but it's not only intended for managed service providers. We actually have a couple of enterprise customers performing a POC as we speak, or planning to perform a POC. Basically, it enables us to take the VMware Cloud and AWS environments and to segment it to multiple tenants, to have this large pool of infrastructure, separate it and manage it from a management perspective and from a resource perspective in a way which is completely separate and multi-tenant. So those are the main updates. Please feel free to ask questions if you have anything about the topics that we just covered. Okay. So I don't see any additional questions at the moment besides Regaf's question. Okay, so if that's the case, Scott, are you with us? Scott, you're on mute.
Hello, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well now.
Thank you. Thank you for unmuting me.
Sorry for that. Okay, great. Yeah, we're ready for you to present us the exciting and game-changing announcement of Datrium. So please take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. As Michael alluded, my name is Scott Stricker. I am the Director of Sales for our cloud solutions. Prior to the acquisition, I led sales for Legacy Datrium. I am based in the U.S., joining you today from Chicago. I also have Matt Place with me. Matt Place is also based in the U.S. out of Atlanta, Georgia. He is a senior staff engineer for Datrium and has made the transition over as part of the VMware acquisition. As I go through this presentation today and share a little bit about what the Datrium solution is offering now inside of the broader VMware product portfolio, please feel free to put questions in the chat. Matt and Michael will begin moderating those questions as we go through. Should there be any questions that would require us to pause and maybe address those during the presentation, we will absolutely do so. But I encourage as much feedback as you guys would, or interaction as you would like to provide. So the first thing, let me start by saying the Datrium DRaaS solution, which was once known as, is now being known as VMware's Cloud Disaster Recovery, or what we're calling VCDR. As I go through the presentation, you might hear me use the terms DRaaS. You might hear me say VCDR. You might also hear me say VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. I am referring to the same thing. I will try to keep everything with a unique language just to make sure that everything is understandable as we go through. So as I proceed, let me just share a little bit about why Datrium made the acquisition, or why VMware made the acquisition of Datrium. So Datrium has been an organization that has been around for close to 10 years. We started by creating a log-based file system that customers used on-prem as their primary storage solution. We evolved that on-prem primary storage solution into the cloud, and then created cloud data services, where we were able to leverage that log-based file system to do some very significant DR as a service, and actually get some significant cost reductions in what normal DR was. So today, I will be talking to you primarily about the cloud data services, which is known as VCDR, and the benefits that it drives. But in comparison, as you think through it, some customers do DR between two primary data center locations, and other people are actually using native cloud services for DR. This is an alternative solution that drives cost economics for DR, and I will talk through that as I go through the presentation and kind of highlight the differences as we go along. So first, let me at least share with you where our founders come from. And the reason why I'm sharing you where our founders come from is to give you a sense of confidence that this is not a product that VMware has purchased and has to sort of re-engineer. There has been an enormous amount of joint engineering going on between the two organizations from our inception. And it is a product that is available today that hundreds of the legacy Datrium customers are currently taking advantage of, and ultimately is going to be available for all the VMware customers as well. So let me at least start with giving you an introduction to our founders. So the two gentlemen in the front row, that is Boris and Ganesh. Boris and Ganesh were early VMware employees underneath Diane Green, and they were the primary principal engineers that created the ESXi hypervisor. The three individuals in the back row, those were all the founders of Data Domain, and Data Domain has successfully sold themselves to EMC, and then eventually part of the Dell Technologies family of products. And they founded Universal Dedupe. They were the pioneers of backup to disk versus backing up to tape. And then lastly, the individual in the back row on the right with glasses, that's Hugo Patterson. Prior to Hugo joining Data Domain, he was the chief scientist at NetApp. And while he was at NetApp, he was posed some challenges from his customers. And those challenges were that their data growth was growing exponentially, and they no longer had enough time during the course of an evening to back up their data. So they'd asked Hugo to come up with some creative ways on how they could achieve backups faster. So Hugo patented Snap and Replicate, and Snap and Replicate is now universally known as snapshots that all backup vendors and storage vendors use. So I show this to you for a couple of reasons. One, to know that our heritage with VMware is long. Two of our founders were the early principal engineers at VMware, as well as that if you reflect back on this group of founders, the people who created virtualization technology, the people who pioneered universal dedupe and backup to disk, and the people who actually created snapshotting, if you think of the technology they've created, I think you'll find it's perfectly reasonable that these are the 5 people who have developed the solution I'm about to share with you. So we're going to be talking a little bit about DR, and we're going to be talking about doing DR cost effectively. But let's take a look at the landscape. I've been doing DR for a long period of time in my career. And as I look back at why we were originally doing DR plans, we originally started doing DR plans because we were worried about natural disasters. Then the DR plan sort of morphed to being able to support power outages and human errors. But if we take a look at it today, the #1 cause for people instantiating their DR plan is due to ransomware. And based upon that, not only do you need to have a sophisticated DR plan, but you need to be able to recover really quickly. And the reason why you need to recover quickly is because if you get hit by malware, you will be instantly put on the clock. You will only have a short period of time to either address how you're going to resolve it or have to pay up before losing your data. So let's go in to talk about the different ways that people are addressing DR. I'm going to build this out. So there's 2 real methods of addressing DR that we find our customers are actually leveraging. First, there's the customers that are leveraging backups as a way to recover from any sort of disaster. And they might have backups not only on-prem, but they might also be replicating their backups to an out-of-region copy. And their method to recover would be to rehydrate or restore their data from a backup back into their primary storage solution to recover from that instance. And we can see there's a group of different vendors on here. We talked about the Data Domain team who was part of our founders who first started doing backup to disk versus tape. Today, many of you might be using some of the new hybrid solutions such as Veeam, Cohesity, and Rubrik, who offer some very significant backup solutions and probably also offer the ability to replicate those backups to an out-of-region copy, as I mentioned earlier, potentially even into the cloud. And then you actually have the actual cloud-based native backup providers, and those are Clumio and Druva, who just do cloud-based native backups. So all of those could in fact be solutions that you might look to employ for not only your backups, but you might also look to it as a way that you would use that to recover from a disaster. Now, the challenge with leveraging backups when you recover from a disaster, specifically as it's associated with ransomware, is the amount of time it takes to recover. So let me give you an example. Should you get hit by malware and you have a week to recover, and you are trying to, and when you get hit by malware, you have to recover at scale. It's not just recovering a file. It's not just recovering a VM. It's recovering the totality of your data. So let's say it's 200 terabytes and 500 VMs. In a backup scenario, to recover that, you actually have to rehydrate that data or restore that data out of your backup target and put it back into your primary storage solution just so you can start the workload. At 200 terabytes of data trying to restore, that could take you multiple days just to restore that data, just to be able to turn it on. And then quickly, once you turned it on, you might quickly realize that, oops, that backup also has malware in it. Let's go to the next version, or the next backup point. And then you start that process over again. And as you can see, by doing that, you quickly run out of time in order to recover. So now there's Datrium. I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek at the differences between us and backup solution. The difference between Datrium versus other backup solutions is with Datrium, you never have to rehydrate or restore your data out of Datrium into your primary storage solution to restart it. With every single backup point inside of Datrium, you can instantly start it, whether it's 1 VM, whether it's 2,000 VMs, and whether it's your most recent recovery point or it's a recovery point a year ago. They all start up instantly. That is the differentiation, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next few slides. So for customers that don't leverage backups, and these would be customers, let's say, that are large enterprise organizations that have a secondary data center, and they're doing DR between their 2 on-premise data centers. Now, for those customers, those are, again, larger customers, probably have larger IT budgets that can afford a duplication of their entire infrastructure sitting in a secondary data center. And the challenges they face is clearly it is a very expensive proposition to have a duplication of data centers and equipment. So it's incredibly costly. It's incredibly complex, and it's incredibly fragile. So let me talk about the complexity. I think the cost is easy to understand, but let's talk about the complexity. DR touches everything. It touches everything from the network to the application. So you have to ensure from IP addressing schemes to DNS entries to, your ability to instantiate a workload in the order in which it needs to come up is all accounted for. And those complexities make it very fragile. And the reason why it makes it fragile is your primary data center is always changing. There's everything from driver updates to BIOS updates to firmware to vSphere updates to just normal application updates. And as good as we think we are at change control, we always miss things. And thus, when we have two data centers that we're doing DR between, we always test our DR plan once every 6 months. And the reason we test our DR plan once every 6 months is not to see that it works, but it's to find out what's broke since we've last tested it so that we can fix it. And then once we fix it, if we were to have a DR event immediately after, we would have a high degree of confidence it would work. But every day that goes by after a couple weeks after a DR plan, you lose your confidence that it would work should you have to execute on it. Now, that's just the fragility and the complexity that goes along with it. But the cost is always changing too. Every time you're adding additional storage capacity into your primary data center, you're adding it to your secondary data center too. And think about applications, how frequently you're adding new applications or changing new applications in your environment. Most people, their applications are changing quite fast. And if you're changing an application today, you don't have a good sense that it will work in your DR plan until you get to that DR testing environment. So there outlines some of the two ways that people are doing DR, not only from backups, but having multiple data centers, and the challenges associated with each. So what Datrium has done is taken a very complicated, expensive, fragile DR process and converted it into a very cost-effective, easy-to-use SaaS-based product. So as I walk through this, let me share with you some of the advantages of the development of the product over years. So as I alluded to early on, Datrium started out as an infancy as a primary storage solution, a log-based file system that looked a lot like a SAN, but wasn't a SAN. It looked a lot like hyperconverged, but wasn't hyperconverged. But that's what we were offering. We quickly then started offering DR as a service to VMC on AWS for our customers that had our primary storage solution. Today, we're actually offering the same DR as a service solution to VMware on AWS, regardless of the primary storage solution that you have on-prem. So for everyone listening today, what I'm going to be talking about on these next few slides, you can take advantage of today without any changes in your current data center. You can leverage every decision you've already made and every dollar you've already spent and still get the most reliable, easy to use DR as a service in the industry today. So let's talk through this. There are roughly 4 major areas to delivering DRaaS, which again is branded as VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, or VCDR. Let me talk about the 4 primary components. The first component, and actually let me pause for a second. Everything that I'm going to be talking about I'm going to be talking about from a production site, so the lower left corner, to the cloud. But we'll also protect workloads. If you already have workloads in VMC on AWS today, we can also provide DR from one availability zone in AWS to another availability zone. And we'll also be supporting in the future DR between one AWS region and another region. So we'll support them both. So everything that I'm going to talk about from prem to cloud is the same as cloud to cloud. But let me just focus on prem to cloud. So the first step is downloading a lightweight virtual appliance that we call a DRaaS connector. This DRaaS connector is an OVA. You register to your vCenter, and it has one job. The job is you set up protection groups, and a protection group is a group of VMs that you want to snapshot. So the protection group would say, I want to snapshot these VMs at this frequency, whether it's every hour, every day, every week, and I want to retain them for this period of time. So that's what your OVA would do. So lightweight OVA, again, registers to your vCenter, sets up your protection group, snapshots at certain intervals, and retains the data for a certain period of time. It also handles the mobility into the cloud. And when it handles the mobility into the cloud, it actually stores it on a back-end S3 storage container. So you're going to hear me talking about an S3 storage container, but in truth, this is really a live NFS data store. And this is what sets us apart from anyone else in the industry. A lot of your backup vendors today and your storage vendors can actually replicate up into S3. While we use S3 as a backup repository, backend storage, we actually front-end S3 with an EC2 instance with Flash to act as a caching mechanism to turn it into an actual live NFS data store. And the advantage that we have by doing this is we can actually live mount data directly out of S3. So as I alluded to you earlier, if we're using a backup solution and you're storing data in S3, the only way that you can actually leverage that data is you have to rehydrate it out of S3 into vSAN before you can start it. With the VCDR solution, you can start your workloads instantly directly out of S3. You do not have to migrate them over to vSAN before you can start them, allowing you to recover instantaneously from any sort of disaster that you have. Next, let me go to step 3. Create global backup and DR policies via Control Shift. So Control Shift is a full runbook orchestration engine. It is akin to Site Recovery Manager. It most likely will be rebranded as a Site Recovery Manager tool. And it has the functionality that you would expect it to have to do runbooks. So I'll give you an example of what a runbook might look like. Let's say you have a SQL application that is running on-prem, and you want to have a runbook to instantiate SQL in VMC on AWS should there be disaster. So the first step in a SQL runbook might look like change the IP address because SQL now lives on a new network. Step 2 would be change the DNS entry so people know how to reach the SQL server. Step 3 would be turn on SQL. Step 4 might be pause and run a script just to ensure the SQL database is in fact up. Step 5 might be turn on any middleware that SQL needs. And step 6 could be the final step that says now turn on your web tier or your application tier so that your end users can access it. So again, the runbook is everything that you need to do and the order in which you need to do it to turn up an application at an alternative location and make it accessible to your end users. And you can create as many runbooks as you like. You can create a runbook per application, or you could create a runbook for the totality of your data center. Finally, we actually have the VMware Cloud itself. We've got a couple models. We have a model that is called an on-demand only model. And that on-demand only model means there is no software-defined data center created at all. And in the event of a disaster, and you went into Control Shift to execute a failover, the first step would be turn on a software-defined data center, set up the networking, set up my security, turn on my hosts, now live mount my data, right? That would be the series if you wanted to go on demand only. So let me give you a level of tiers. The most cost-effective way of doing VCDR would be on demand only. That's the most cost-effective way. That means you have no software-defined data center. You're not paying for anything. You're only going to pay for it when you need to use it. However, if you don't have a software-defined data center, you must minimally be able to tolerate 3 to 4 hours of recovery time, because that's the length of time it would take to turn up your software-defined data center and get the networking and security set up before you could even start live mounting your data, right? That is the lowest end, and I would say that that would be for smaller commercial type customers. Now, for most customers, the perfect instance for them for their DR is to have what is known as a pilot light. And a pilot light would be a VMware Cloud software-defined data center already created with a minimum of 2 or 3 reserved instances running. And by having those minimum of 2 or 3 reserved instances running, there's some significant benefits. The first benefit is, since you have a software-defined data center already created, you have your networking already set up. You have your security already set up. Everything is there and is available to you. And since you have 2 or 3 instances up and running, you can begin using those 2 or 3 instances. You might have Active Directory running on one. You might have DNS running on another one. You might have your critical applications for your organization running as well, and might even be doing some application replication between your on-prem and in the cloud. And so you're just using the pilot light to maintain a software-defined data center, to have it fully provisioned and configured and your security policies abstracted over it. Now, in the event of a failure, all future workloads would get started on demand. You could start your workloads immediately out of S3, and you would only pay for the additional host that you turned up when you had to use them. So, Matt, let me take a quick pause as I go through the next slide to see if there's any questions that we need to answer before I start building this out further. Okay, I think we're probably good. Can we continue on? So let me build this out for you. So in this example, we have downloaded the virtual appliance, you've registered to your vCenter, you've set up protection groups. You are snapshotting whether it's your SAN, your NAS hyperconverged, or disaggregated hyperconverged, whatever you have in your data center. You're snapshotting that, those VMs at certain increments, and you're protecting them for certain periods of time, and you're doing mobility up into S3. We also are demonstrating a pilot light, a small VMware cloud that is fully instantiated and available, albeit in a minimal instance. Your networking security policies are up. Now, let's assume you had a SQL disaster. And let's say SQL is just having issues. And in order to maintain business continuity, you decide that you want to turn up SQL in the cloud to maintain business continuity while you work to remediate SQL on-prem. You would log into Control Shift, you would click Failover, and instantly the data is live mounted and started directly out of S3 into the VMC cloud, and it is available to your users instantly. And that is the big advantage, and let me keep calling that out. In any other scenario, in order to instantiate SQL in the cloud, you would first have to rehydrate that data out of its backup target into vSAN before you could start it. In this instance, because ours is a full NFS live data store, we live mounted and started the workload directly out of S3. And now it's up and running instantaneously. Now, in the background, during idle time, we will actually do a storage vMotion out of S3 into NVMe vSAN to increase your performance. So the goal of VCDR is you bring up the workloads immediately, and then you increase performance. At this point, you're fully running now into VMware's cloud. Any additional hosts above and beyond the pilot light that were turned on to support that workload, you would only pay for them as you needed them. You are fully operationalized in vCenter, or everything's VMware format. We don't refactor your data. So if you use vCenter on-prem in a steady state, you're using vCenter in the cloud while you're under duress. You never have to change the tool set or the skill set that your people use. Eventually, once you bring SQL back up on-prem, since we don't refactor your data, we can easily fail you back. And that is one of the advantages that we have, but it's almost a dirty little secret when you do DR to the cloud. When most organizations do DR to the cloud, they always talk about failover. No one talks about failback. And the reason why most people don't talk about failback is because they can't get you back. They get you to the cloud, but you're stuck there. With VCDR, not only can we cost effectively get you to the cloud, operationalize you within the same vCenter that you know and love today, but we can fail you back with an easy one-click failback. And we only send the Delta changes back. So if you were running in the cloud for 2 days, and if you had a 2% change in data, we would only send the 2% change blocks back, reducing the egress costs that you would realize and bringing your production site back up online as fast as possible. At which point, we then shrink your VMware cloud back down to its pilot-like instance, and the bill for those additional on-demand hosts stop. And that is the cost-effective benefit of doing DR and leveraging VCDR. So instead of you using 2 primary production sites where you have a duplicity of things, of everything from network all the way to your application tier, or even if you're doing it in the cloud, where the cloud was 100% reserved instances, this solution is cost-effective because it allows you to leverage the cloud and only have a minimal footprint for your reserved instances, and then allows you to pay for any on-demand host should you need them. And that's been a benefit of the VCDR solution. Next, if I just had one slide to show you, this would be the slide I would show you. This is the slide I'd like to show customers, because this is your experience. Your experience as an administrator would be, if I do everything through vCenter on-prem, then I'm very familiar with the tile with the green logo. That is my vSphere on-prem interface. But now if I'm in the cloud, it is my same vSphere screen and operation pane that I use, and it's just represented by a blue logo versus green. So every skill that your team has today, they can leverage it with this solution. Finally, or not finally, I got 2 more slides for you. One of the slides, or this slide, talks about continuous compliance checks. I started my story out at the beginning talking about customers testing their DR plan once a year, every 6 months. And the reason why they were testing it is because they just want to see what's broke since they've last tested it. Well, we believe that if you're going to create a cost-effective, SaaS-based product to do DR, that it would be reasonable to have continuous compliance checks. And that's exactly what we do. Every 30 minutes, Control Shift will take a look at your production site. It'll measure it against your destination target, which is VMC on AWS, and compare that to the runbook. And it will let you know every 30 minutes if you need to execute your DR plan, will it work or won't it? And no one in the industry does it. So you don't have to wait every 6 months to test your DR plan to see if it works. Every 30 minutes, you have an automated report that will tell you if it will work or if it won't work. More importantly, it tells you if something broke, if there was configuration drift. So you can go fix it right away. So let's say replication failed from your primary production data center into the cloud. You know about it instantly within a 30-minute time frame. So now you can go fix it. Or a network port changed in VMC on AWS. You can go fix it. You don't have to wait till a disaster strikes to find out your DR plan doesn't work and then try to triage what went wrong. We will let you know every 30 minutes that it will work, If it won't, we'll tell you specifically what went wrong. And now think of this too. The compliance reports are created per run book. So let's say you create a run book for a certain application, and you have an application owner in your company. You can go to that application owner every 30 minutes, once a day, once a week, as frequently as you want to, and say, by the way, here is my compliance report. I can show you that your application will work all the time, and be able to deliver that to them. Here's my last slide. Let's talk about ransomware. I started talking about ransomware in the beginning, meaning ransomware is the #1 reason people are instantiating their DR plans. So how do we assist in this scenario? Well, there's 3 primary things that allow the VCDR solution to recover from ransomware without requiring you to have to pay any Bitcoin. So the first thing is just our true speed. We allow people to start workloads or backups directly out of S3 without having to rehydrate those back into a primary storage solution. So here would be an example. You get hit by malware. You turn on your most recent backup. You start it up. So no rehydration, restart. Start it up, you look at it and say, nope, there's malware in this one. Got it. Go to the next backup. Click on the next backup. You look at that one. Nope, there's malware in that one. Fine, go to the one a week ago. Click on that one. Oh, that one looks clean. Great, that's the one we're using. And the period of time that I was talking to you is the period of time that is largely going to take. All we do is restart. We restart workloads. And here's an advantage. We don't have to restart the most recent workload. We can start any workload from any point in time that you've ever taken. And typically the way a ransomware scenario would work is you would look at 2 different protection periods. Malware hits you 3 to 6 months early. They always do, and they wait to pull the trigger. So you would probably go back 3 to 6 months to find the VM that had the clean copy of your OS before malware was infected. And you're going to say, I'm going to take that one. And then you're going to take the most recent backup of your data prior to being encrypted. And you're going to marry the 2 together, and you're up and running. Additionally, we're immutable backups. We use a worm-based type of log-based file system, meaning you can write a unique block of data once, and you can read it as many times as you want, but you can only write a unique block of data once. So if we think of how malware works, malware is actually going to encrypt your file, so it actually has to change it. Well, since you can only write a unique block once, you can actually recreate every block, but you can't overwrite the good data. And then finally, we do everything at scale, whether it's 1 VM, whether it's thousands of VM, whether it's the most recent point in time backup or the longest backup in the catalog that you have. You can start them all up at scale, and it all starts the same way. It's all instant. So Michael, let me pause there. I know we roughly have about 15 minutes if there's questions, and or if we wanted to allow Matt to kind of just give them a quick preview of how this would work in a real tool.
So I think there was one question on chat. Matt, you might want, can you unmute yourself, Matt? Let's see. We had some.
You might have to unmute him like you unmuted me.
Oh, sorry for that.
We're good now. Thank you. Appreciate it, Michael. Would you mind repeating the question for me? Because I think I had to log out and log back in, and I lost the question.
Yeah, sure. No worries. So question is, can you use this solution as your only backup solution and restore specific data on demand, such as one database or one lost email or file, and not an entire virtual machine?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, today we're focused on the disaster recovery use case primarily. Anything that we do from a backup standpoint today is incidental. There's a tremendous amount of product life cycle and experience out with 500 plus production customers that this technology was built on, and the underpinnings of that backup capability are there. We just haven't brought those forward yet into the VCDR solution. So today it is disaster recovery only. but the groundwork has been laid for a potential backup capability in the future that will offer many of those things that you asked about.
Okay, perfect. So I don't see any other questions at the moment.
Scott, you can see my screen?
Yep.
Yes, I can, and maybe you can give the caveat of the UI rebranding.
Yes, sir. So as you folks know, and you know, based on what Scott mentioned earlier, this product is a GA product from Datrium, but as a part of the acquisition, there's a number of things that VMware wants to do in order to relaunch the product, you know, within the broader VMware portfolio. And so many of those things that need to be done are going to be to design a UI that is consistent with the rest of the VMware products, along with branding and many other things. So what you see before you is the GA product from Datrium pre-acquisition. So expect this stuff to change. So we're going to step through a few of the primary elements here in a very, very brief kind of walkthrough of the environment. We're not going to do a test or a full failover given the time constraints today, but we can certainly follow up you know, after this webinar and do one-off meetings. So here's the primary dashboard, and this gives you the high-level overview of what could potentially be a multi-site deployment. Today, up to 20 sites, you know, replicating to and managed from a single control shift instance running as a cloud-native application. And so from here, I get you know, some of the vital data that you'd expect that I may need, you know, to leverage to manage and operate the environment. There are many quality of life, you know, elements inside of the UI in terms of you see me mousing over things and being able to get a constrained view of the information and be able to readjust these things. As you can see, we've got 3 primary sites that are replicating into this, you know, cloud file system, as Scott mentioned. And then we have what's called field demo here is the name that we've given our VMware Cloud SDDC instance that we've spun up for this environment. Now, if there were a replication ongoing at this moment, you would see the transfer rate appear in the arrows here showing the relationship. So again, quality of life elements in terms of, you know, really lowering the bar of complexity and minimizing the operational overhead that it would take to manage what traditionally is a very complex capability, disaster recovery. So that is one of the design goals, is to make this as simple and easy to use as possible. So from the dashboard, you know, we may go, you know, through this in a number of different ways, but what I'm going to do is tell a brief story as if this were the first time that we were deploying. So we've landed, of course, in the dashboard upon login. The first thing that we would do is go here to the sites section, and we would establish one or more sites that we would like to protect. From here, we can define, you know, how we would deploy the virtual machine proxy or our DRaaS connector that would be deployed as a virtual machine on-prem. As the mechanism through which we are able to acquire the data. That mechanism is through VADP today. From here, we enable the vCenter integration so that we can understand the inventory of the virtual environment and then start to take action on those elements. We would also deploy the actual SDDC from here. Now, VMware Cloud SDDCs are very straightforward to manage, although they're very powerful. And so hidden behind these simple UIs is a tremendous amount of capability, which can be a learning curve, and there's some complexity inherent to that. So in context of disaster recovery, there's a small, narrow, you know, finite number of options that we really need to configure at a bare minimum in order to have an effective solution. So what we've done with this product is we've enabled a fully orchestrated turn up of the VMware Cloud SDDC from scratch. So whether that be on demand, as Scott talked about earlier, or that be a small 3-node pilot light environment from which we would scale up and add hosts commensurate with the workload that we're trying to recover. All of that can be managed through this UI without having to go to any other interfaces or anything like that. And while you may still have good reason to go to those interfaces for other purposes, for the sake of disaster recovery, everything that you really need to do with that SDDC can be done from this interface, from management of the network and the edge interconnectivity and reachability, as well as adding hosts and even accessing vCenter directly from here. So now that we have protected sites set up and a failover SDDC, we would create a protection group, and I'll go ahead and pull up one of these. And from here, we would define a name, a site that we would want to target, a vCenter within that site. And what's really powerful is we can set up a naming convention to automatically populate these policies with the virtual machines based on a naming schema. So if you have something consistent in your organization or can create something that's consistent, you can now have backup policies, that correspond to this disaster recovery capability. Have these policies automatically keep themselves up to date with additions to the environment or subtractions from the environment in terms of virtual machines. Now in the future, we will have other methods for adding things to these policies. Now, after you've added the workloads to the policies, we of course need to create a schedule. And here we have a very simple schedule of creating daily snapshots and keeping those snapshots for 1 week. Now, perhaps you might decide that I need to keep weeklies for a longer period of time. We need to start enhancing our protection against ransomware. And maybe now you have a compliance requirement that says, let's keep things for many years. And you can do this all in a single backup policy for a workload, or perhaps split it across multiple policies. So now that we have sites and we've defined what we're going to protect and how often and how long we will keep that data, we now need to create a DR plan. There are many examples in here. We'll just take this here first one. We'll go ahead and click on it. And you can see the compliance check. If I click show, you can see all of the elements that we're going to check every 30 minutes to ensure that this system is going to be, or this policy is viable and ready to go when we need it to. And we can even create a PDF report and download that and maybe give it to our compliance controllers. Now from here, we would be able to either direct this to do a failover. We would either or be able to do a test plan or a test of this plan. And in either case, if we were to run this test, and then it would generate a report, which we track here, both in terms of configuration changes, as well as the execution of a test. And by way of example, I've already pulled up a PDF report here, and you can see all of the many things that we're going to capture, a lot of audit level detail about the test, when it was run, how long things took, what was the configuration of the environment that we were testing, what were the steps involved, and how long did each one of those steps take, and then ultimately any errors that may have transpired through the test. And so that would be the compliance report for the test failover that you might do once or twice a year or once a quarter or what have you. And then, from this, and, same UI right here, we would, if we had executed the test plan, then the test plan button would get replaced with a cleanup button. So if we do a test, we don't have a tremendous amount of work ahead of us after doing this test. We simply hit the cleanup test button, and it will kind of unwind in reverse order the steps it took to do the failover test. So as a high level kind of, walkthrough, that's really the user interface. It's pretty straightforward. It's extremely powerful. We do a lot through automation and policy and enforcement. And so again, our goal was operational simplicity and getting, a system built that allows our prospects and our customers to focus in on what's unique to them, which is, the design of their disaster recovery plan and how and when it might get executed. Any questions thus far?
Yeah, we have 2 questions on the chats. Can you see them, or do you want me to read out?
I can see them. Yeah, does DNS need to be changed for this to work with DR? The short answer is no, but depending on your situation, the answer may be yes. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility in here. This takes care of the vast majority of backing up the data, getting it to the DR site, and then giving you the ability to create a run book that automates all of the steps necessary to do a failover. However, this is just a tool. There has to be a broader design for the disaster recovery plan. And if in order to have reachability to your workload that's been recovered in the cloud, If that requires you to make DNS changes, then that should be accounted for as a part of the architecture and then maybe implemented as a part of the runbook plan. Whereas other customers in other situations, they may not have the need to change DNS. For example, if you have a pilot light, one of the side effect benefits of doing that is I can run Active Directory, DNS, global server load balancing, local load balancing, and various other core data center services, and I can run those all the time out in that cloud, maybe even NSX and things like that, in order to simplify any changes that I might have to make to my network in order to retain reachability to those services when they come back online. Any plans to integrate with SRM? So in broad sense, the short answer is no from a technology standpoint, but in terms of the portfolio, we're going to be two sides of the same coin. So from a VMware perspective, we've obviously had the SRM or the SR capability for disaster recovery for a long time. Now, to complement that in the portfolio, we're bringing in this Datrium solution now called VCDR. And what VCDR is going to bring to the table is a more cost-effective, on-demand, focused or scale-up focused disaster recovery solution that's going to enable us to start smaller and grow as we need this environment too, and make better use of the cloud by enabling us to either keep a very small footprint of VMC in the cloud for DR, or no footprint of VMC and only turn it on when we need it. And that's addressing one of the two major challenges with DR that Scott mentioned earlier. And of course, we address the complexity one as well through automation. On the other side, we have SRM, and what that's going to be really great for is going to be site to site, so on-prem to on-prem data center disaster recovery. And for any of these situations where I have applications that need the absolute minimum RTO and minimum RPO possible, in terms of the recovery plan, that's where site recovery manager is going to kind of remain at the forefront.
And Matt, if I might just offer just a little bit too, because I think you kind of summed it up perfectly at the end. The way we see this, and as Matt alluded to, for your prem-to-prem DR, Site Recovery Manager is the suite of software that provides orchestration. From prem to cloud, for your tier 0 and tier 1 applications that require, let's say, instant availability, you would use one reserved instances up and running in the cloud, and you would use site recovery as a mechanism to orchestrate those. For all of your lesser tier applications, so tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 applications that you want to get the cost-effective nature of VCDR, you would leverage VCDR for those. So this isn't one versus the other. It's the combination of both leveraging VMware Cloud, leveraging site recovery for your instant available tier 0, tier 1 apps, and then leveraging VCDR for your tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 applications. So that is a sort of a holistic view to deliver the very best solution at the best cost point for each of your tiered applications.
And Scott, if I may clarify one thing there as well, to put a point on this, when it comes to the difference between VCDR and SRM from a practical standpoint, RPO is really kind of the delta there. With VCDR, our minimum RPO today, and this will change in the future, we will reduce this, but our RPO minimum is 4 hours. This is through VADP. With SRM, of course, we have other options through storage replication that gets that RPO much lower. And that's really going to be probably the deciding factor of for what tier of application or specific environment we may be protecting with which solution.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. And Michael, thank you for giving us the forum to talk with some of your customers today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Matt and Scott. And if anybody listening that would like to get further details, please feel free to reach out, and we would love to have a follow-up session, provide more details, provide demos, POCs, whatever is required. So thank you everybody for your time, and thank you for participating.